Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alastair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we are once again reviving the recommendations section. This time, we are going back to the 80s, where I have been rising from the dead with classic Spider-Man comic Kraven's Last Hunt, and Nick has been battling the Cybermen in classic Doctor Who adventure Earthshock. But before we find out what we both made of those 80s classics, Nick, do you have something to recommend to our listeners?
In slightly more recent comics, I have been sitting down to read the entirety of The Walking Dead, the epic, sprawling 193-issue comic series by Robert Kirkman, Tony Moore and Charlie Adlard, which ran for 14 years, I think, across the 2000s, 2010s and very early 2020s, and of course has now inspired a sprawling TV empire of, I think, 4 shows so far, with another 3 in development. It's
really too much.
It is a lot of content for a series with such a basic premise, yeah. It's like, okay, it's about people in a post-apocalyptic zombie world. Is there anything else to it? No, they're just there. Okay, cool, let's make loads of stuff. Anyway, yeah, so I've been reading the original comics, which spawned all this, in the form of 4 gigantic compendium volumes, which each contain 48 issues of the series. Well, the last one contains 49. Maths fans, that's how we get to 193. But anyway. So firstly, yeah, my lap has been taking some weight. Yep. And secondly, it's good. I can't remember if I've delivered my most recent experience with The Walking Dead show on this podcast, but yeah, I got to the end of season 9 of the TV show, and then, to be honest, just kind of drifted away from it. Now that I know they're finishing it with season 11, part of me does want to go back and watch the last 2 seasons, because, you know, there's only 2 more, isn't it? But I really did find the last couple of seasons I watched a bit of a slog, so I haven't done that. And the volume of spin-offs they're now pumping out has only discouraged me. But yeah, the comic, I thought I'd finally read. And you know what? Yeah, it's really good. It's got a couple of flaws, and it's not my favourite thing I've ever read, but it's very, very readable. I can see how this became, you know, probably unarguably one of the big non-superhero comic hits of the last, decade or two. It moves along at a very sort of brisk pace, it's got a very sort of clear premise, and crucially it keeps developing in a very steady way. Honestly, the problem I had with the TV show by the time I finally got bored and stopped watching it was that it felt like everything had been the same for about 5 years, and it never seemed like anything was ever going to change. And the comic, especially in these sort of 4 compendium-sized generations, really feels like it grows through this sort of process of, you know, they're wandering around on their own, taking refuge in desperate abandoned buildings. They form they form a network of settlements in a sort of mini society, and then by the 4th one, you know, things are, you know, really developing. There are huge societies and stuff, and, you know, it feels like something's steadily happening, and it turns out it's much quicker when you can just read, because the compendiums, even though they're the size of 2 separate bricks, yeah, it takes about, I'd say half an hour, 40 minutes to read a single chapter, and they reach 8 chapters, so that's about 4 hours. 4 hours to read a quarter of the series, you know. In 4 hours, I could watch about a third of one of the, 11 seasons of The Walking Dead. It's just got a lot more pace and a lot more whip to it. And there are sacrifices that are made to get that pace, and I'll get to that. But no, it's a very enjoyable, steadily building soap opera experience. I did enjoy it a lot.
So do they stick to the plot of the comic? Now that you've read both, you can compare, or do they make sort of creative changes?
I'm trying to avoid specifics, because who dies is, I think, quite a big pivot point.
That's a key part
of a big part of the suspense in both the comic and the TV show. But yeah, I'd say they stick to the plot quite carefully. I was actually surprised that even when I got to the point that I recognised the point where I stopped watching the TV show, and even then I still recognised several key plot beats from season 9 of the show. So the plot is actually being stuck to quite carefully. What changes quite a lot is the character beats, exactly who dies when, who sticks around, who's in a relationship with whose personality is like that. You know, they've taken quite a lot of changes and liberties with the characters, but they've stuck fairly closely to the plot, I guess, which some might say shows you how inconsequential the characters are to the plot. But nonetheless, the plot's there. It's just they've based, I guess, on which actors work, which actors want to stick around, decisions they've made, and bits of chemistry they've worked in. Yeah, that's what they've changed.
Right, I see, yeah. They've kept to the plot, which I suppose might be why the show unfolds slower.
I think so, yeah. I think the show... I'll get to my main criticism I end up having of The Walking Dead is the dialogue is just quite soapy and overwrought. The joke just becomes, when you're reading The Walking Dead, whenever any character speaks to another, especially if they're in a one-on-one situation, there's no chit-chat in The Walking Dead. There's no fucking time for small talk in the zombie apocalypse. You just turn to the person next to you and blurt out all your deepest feelings. Just turn to them and say, "Hello, sir, here is my motivation." No, there's no chit-chat and there's no naturalistic dialogue in the zombie apocalypse. You know, that's how he keeps it moving. That's how he keeps everything going along into this very, very steady, readable, enjoyable clip, and that's how he gets through his plots quite quickly. There's about 1 million characters. You only get about a page every issue or two, but in that time they fully explained what their mindset is at that point.
Yeah, I suppose that would just look quite ridiculous on TV. Well, yeah, unless you really are going for like straight up soap opera, everything's on the surface.
Well, that's what it reads like. I mean, that's what it is like. It's a sort of soap writing. It's just, yeah, very straightforward. I'm going to yell my feelings at you now, or whisper them if I don't hate you. Yeah, it would be ridiculous on a TV show. One of the reasons they've had to slow the pacing down to such a, at times, honestly punishing cruel, is to, write naturalistic characterization and actual, slow simmering tension and stuff. But it just means the storylines move at an absolute snail's pace.
Oh, right, it's interesting, yeah. I mean, this is all very interesting to me because I've actually not read any of the comics or watched any of the TV show. This is probably the biggest pop culture phenomenon of the last 10 to 15 years that has almost entirely passed me by. Partly because I think I did get a bit completely oversaturated with zombies. When I went to see Zombieland, I was basically like, this isn't even particularly funny. Sorry, Zombieland fans. Zombies are just totally done. However, shortly after that, actually, I did watch the BBC show In the Flesh, which, lo and behold, did come up with a fresh take on zombies, i.e. it's after the apocalypse and the zombies are being treated and reintegrated into society. And also, yeah, I suppose The Girl with All the Gifts came along at a similar time that has also a fresh take.
Yeah.
Maybe The Walking Dead suffered from coming out at the time when I was most kind of zombies, it's been done. And then I kind of blinked and then there were like 8 seasons and like 4 spin-offs, so it was a bit too much to get into. The point being is that people might be surprised to find out that this is something that has completely passed me by.
Yeah, I got into the TV show because I honestly hadn't been zombied out before I started watching The Walking Dead. And then I watched The Walking Dead for 9 solid years. And after that, yeah, I've had enough of them. But yeah, it's honestly impressive to me how total the success of this has been. Like, I know everything's a fucking spin-off cinematic universe now if they can possibly make it into one. But the fact they've managed to get about 6 spin-off shows out of The Walking Dead is baffling to me. Good luck to everybody who works on them. A blessing on your house. Well done on finding such a lucrative cow to slaughter. But yeah, very strange to me if there's this much appetite for all these shows about just general bleak zombie survival with, at times, alarmingly little difference between them.
Yeah, but it has been one of those things that's really cut through to mainstream success. I mean, yeah, I know people who don't really engage much with geek TV but do watch The Walking Dead. And to be fair, certainly the first few seasons were very well received and everyone was like, oh, you've got to watch this, it's brilliant.
Yeah, I think Walking Dead fatigue, based on my read of the culture, seemed to set in around season 7 or 8. And to be fair, season 8 is what killed me. Season 8, I was honestly sick of it by the end of season 8. I then watched season 9 anyway because I'm a limpet masochist. But then I made it to the end of that. I was like, that was actually a bit better than season 8, but I just don't want to watch this anymore. Maybe one day I will be sick in my bed or something and I'll decide to plough through seasons 10 and 11. I don't know, just to finish the show. But as I say, the fact that I know a bunch of the characters, again, I won't spoil which ones, just in case you've somehow missed the press releases they've inexplicably put out before the show finished.
That's like a soap opera. Soap operas do that as well.
It's mental, yeah. The fact that they've put out releases and stuff about which characters are getting spin-off shows before you, air quotes, know whether they live or die at the end of the parent show. To be honest, that was one of the things that, yeah, to go off on one again, actually killed The Walking Dead a bit for me, and which the comic, thankfully, doesn't do. The Walking Dead gets very attached to certain characters. I'm going to distinguish now. The show gets very attached to certain characters, I guess, because, the actors are popular. And by about season 6 or 7, it really became clear in The Walking Dead that this was very much a 2-tiered society. There was the golden inner circle of like regular characters who would basically never die. They might knock off one of them per season in the finale, but basically these people were safe. And then there's the cannon fodder, everyone else. Occasionally someone gets elevated to the inner circle, I guess because they've, take it off among the fans or something. But most of the time, yeah, there's just this group of golden gods who just sit there surviving when everyone else gets hacked to bits. Yeah, and in the comics, to be fair, they're pretty brutal about it. By the point I'm at, which is about halfway through the final compendium, yeah, the amount of characters who's left from season 1 is basically 0, whereas there's a fair few still left in the TV show, I think. Certainly a lot of season 1/season 2 characters still knocking around.
Yeah, it does take some of the tension out of it.
It does a bit. And funnily enough, a lot of those special golden super people are the ones who are getting spin-offs. At some point, I'm hoping they'll make their seeming immortality into a plot point.
It's really the only place left to go at this point.
Yeah. But no, the comic does not do that. The comic, as I say, the soap opera dialogue is a bit grating at times, but honestly, once you hammer through about 5 volumes in succession, like I've been doing, you get used to it. So yeah, that's what I've been doing, reading a comical amount of Walking Dead comics. Alastair, what have you been doing?
Well, you've been reading a recent comic, a la your comic recommendation, and I've been watching a recent TV show, a la my TV recommendation. See what I did there? So
I do see it, yes, I do see it.
See it in the waveform. I've been watching a show on Netflix called Cleo, which is a new German language thriller. The plot is it follows Cleo, who is an assassin for the Stasi in late 1980s Berlin in the German Democratic Republic. That's the communist one, for people who don't know their German history. She's an assassin, and she picks up targets for the communist government of East Germany, and then she's betrayed by her superiors and thrown in prison. However, a year or so after this, the Berlin Wall comes down and the government releases all political prisoners, and Cleo is released from prison and goes on a revenge murder spree against the people who wronged her. Yeah, it's a good, entertaining show. It's got this sort of hyper-real edge to it in that, like, although it's kind of about someone seeking revenge for being betrayed by some of the people closest to them, and some quite nasty things do happen in prison, which I won't spoil, that lead to her, wanting to revenge against everyone. But it does have this also slightly absurd, slightly funny kind of hyper-reality to it. Some of the people get dispatched in quite over-the-top ways. There's a memorable scene involving an exploding suit that someone puts on, and things like that. And it's kind of all shot through with this sort of late 80s, early 90s Berlin youth culture. Lots of things that go on in like warehouse raves and techno parties and things like that. Yeah, Cleo comes home to discover that a West German DJ is living in her apartment, or the apartment that she's not been living in because she's been in prison, and he's on all sorts of drugs and playing weird techno music, and then they sort of form a unlikely friendship bond. So yeah, it's got some sort of dark bits, it's got some quite funny bits, it's got some quite odd bits. It's all over the shop tonally, but it sort of makes it work in this sort of slightly strange way.
Okay, I'm almost sad I didn't nod this through when you suggested its cover on the podcast now. This sounds quite fun.
I'd certainly recommend it. Yeah, it's quite over the top. Yeah, but it's got a great soundtrack. It's got, sort of lots of like cultural nods and things like that. It doesn't seem to have attracted much attention. I don't know if it's more popular in Germany than it is here. Yeah, I'd recommend it if you're looking for something a little different.
Okay, this is one of Netflix's many subtitled shows. They seem to be moving hard into this area.
Yeah, I guess as they grow around the world, they're commissioning more and more original content in different languages.
Sounds fun. Sounds quirky. Is it one for the Killing Eve fans?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Yeah, in that it's a spy drama that doesn't take itself like super, super seriously. The drama is serious, I suppose. That there's a kind of conspiracy she's unpicking the layers of. There's a big mystery, which is like, why was she suddenly betrayed by her superiors and the people she was closest to her and sent off to prison? That's the sort of mystery, which obviously I won't spoil now. So there's a serious spy plot to it. And also you get the sense that Cleo has been quite traumatized by first betrayal of the people she trusted and her experience in prison. So it does take those things seriously, again, as Killing Eve took the violence and things like that seriously. But at the same time, there's a sort of wry humour to it all. It's not a show that's trying to, I guess, present itself as a realistic depiction of Cold War espionage or something that takes itself incredibly seriously.
Okay, yeah, I can dig that.
Yeah, I think the Killing Eve comparison is a good one.
Killing Eve was a good sort of Killing Eve at its best, i.e. in season 1. It was a good sort of pop spy thing. It didn't really concern itself with, getting super intricate on the details of spycraft, but it's had the sleight of hand tension and are there betrayals? Obviously don't spoil them, but is there the crucial someone's not who you think they are, or someone's a baddie betrayals?
There's layers to the conspiracy. Okay. Things are uncovered. It's got quite a large cast of characters, I suppose. They sort of build out Cleo's life when she's an assassin and after she's released from prison. And then, there's revelations about the characters in her orbit. There's also a plot line involving this really dumb West Berlin detective who's a fraud detective who somehow happened to stumble across one of her murders and is convinced that this is going to make his career. But obviously he's dumb and he's not a murder detective and he just gets everything wrong. So nice. There's twists and turns. There's a revelation. Obviously there's a conspiracy that they're uncovering. So there are lots of surprises.
Okay, good. No, I should probably actually watch this at some point. I say this about a million things, and it's going on the pile. But in my defense, I have finally watched Yellow Jackets and most of Severance, so I am actually getting through the pile.
Those are very, very good, yeah. Likely to feature high on my list of best shows of the year.
Yeah, they'll probably both be in mine as well. Spoilers again for the list. It's going to be a competitive list this year. It's been quite a strong year. I don't know if that's just because I've been actually making an effort to watch things for once, but no, there's quite a lot going on.
Yeah, it does seem to be a very good year. I mean, I think I watched more TV last year because we were locked down for the first half of it. But I don't know if less TV came out because they weren't making it. I did spend a lot of time last year catching up on old shows that people recommended.
There you go, listeners. Only a few months till you can see our incredibly full and relevant top fives. Okay, and first up, today's first recommendation, it's Kraven's Last Hunt, a 6-part Spider-Man story published in 1987 by J.M. DeMatteis and Mike Zeck. This is, of course, the final battle between Spider-Man and his previously quite comical and unthreatening Tarzan-looking nemesis, Kraven the Hunter. But in this last story, he comes back with a new, terrifying edge, having had what appears to be a breakdown, determined to not just beat Spider-Man in a fight or something, but kill, consume, and become him in some quite unsettling ways. I think to cover this, we're going to have to spoil the ending. The ending is in some ways in the title, but nonetheless, if you don't want to be spoiled for the ending of this, 25-year-old story? Possibly 35, actually? Maybe don't listen to this review. But anyway, we'll manage to avoid spoiling it for maybe a few seconds, but I can't promise anything. Alastair, what did you think of this story?
I think I can give some overall thoughts without dropping spoilers, but yeah, we'll have to get to the spoilers soon. I really enjoyed reading this comic. What I liked the most about it was how surreal it was, and I mean surreal in a quite specific way. The word surreal is thrown around a lot to basically, most people use it to mean something that's odd or bizarre, but I mean the specific way that the surrealists used it was that they were wanting to explore like the unconscious and death and things like that, and that's very much where this comic goes. I mean, the plot, as you just described, is, relatively straightforward, but there's this kind of very strange edge to it, especially when Kraven's kind of becoming Spider-Man and he's encountering mystical, possibly otherworldly sort of spider-type creatures, and you have the sense of you don't know, is this real? Is this in his head? Is this, a drug-induced hallucination? Is it a sort of mystical element to Spider-Man that he's absorbing? And the story leaves you to make up your own mind about it, but it uses these sort of slightly trippy, strange bits to convey the kind of emotional and thematic things that are going on. How he is more than just putting on Spider-Man's costume, he is trying to become Spider-Man. And I did really like how it kind of used that to dig into these deeper questions about who is Spider-Man, what makes Spider-Man different to other superheroes, what's the difference between Peter Parker and someone else wearing the Spider-Man costume. There was a lot to kind of dig into here, which I liked a lot.
Yeah, the word I came away with after reading this again and trying to think about it was how, visceral it is. It's an 80s grim and gritty comic. I go in prepared for some depressing visuals or messy stabbings, but it always gets under my skin in a way I'm sometimes not fully prepared for, There's a really emotive narration to it, but really just goes in hard. Like, I've honestly thought more about the bleak shortness of life reading this Spider-Man comic about him fighting a Tarzan than I have, some literary novels. But despite its bleakness, I think the thing it does a good job of is reminding us that, as you say, the key thing about Spider-Man is his humanity. And most writers and most stories do this in the standard way of giving him relatable problems like forgetting to pay his gas bill. But the way it's doing it here is to give him a fully sane, relatable reaction to something that probably would be a massive deal to a regular person, even if it wouldn't be a big deal to, Superman or whatever. And even Batman would probably shrug off what happens to Spider-Man here, because although he's not superhuman, he is, to put it kindly, a trained ninja, and to put it less kindly, mentally unwell. But, Spider-Man is rightly completely traumatized by the whole thing, by the mania that Kraven has sunk to, and it's quite viscerally portrayed.
Yeah, and also Spider-Man's own experience of being, dead or near death for 2 weeks and buried alive and things like that, drugged by Kraven, a state that's somewhere beyond comatose or whatever, into a near-death state to which he comes back from. Yeah, and in that time, Kraven's taken his identity and he's out there killing people dressed as Spider-Man. So again, it's quite shocking when you think about what would you do if you just woke up one day and discovered that there was someone had been living your life for the last 2 weeks pretending to be you and killing people claiming they were you. I mean, it would be traumatizing.
Yeah, and this takes place sort of directly after Peter and Mary Jane got married in the comics in the 80s, something which has now been undone in a quite ridiculous way, but we don't need to describe that when talking about this actually good comic. Yeah, and in some ways that marriage isn't a huge part of the story, but in other ways it clearly is, again, because the emotional shift that Spider-Man has gone through when he got married is kind of dug into a lot in narration, and the fact that, like, almost immediately after that, 2 weeks of his post-wedding life, and probably his whole attitude to his new, honeymoon period of his life is completely changed by this horrible thing that happens to him. It's very, very real in a strange way, even though the other side of the narration, the sort of Kraven stuff, is absolutely off-the-charts melodramatic and insane.
Yeah.
And they play off each other quite well. There's a lot of, dueling narration in this comic, which James Mateus writes very, very well.
Yeah, there's a lot of, voiceover, the thoughts of both Peter Parker and Kraven. And it's interesting, something I've noticed from a lot of the comics we've read, more recent ones, that there seems to be I don't know, a trend of certain stuff we've been reading to having a lot of sort of voiceover and narration, kind of adding depth and sort of thought and sometimes more context to things. And I was wondering, is this the origins of this modern trend? I guess the influence of this comic? It seems to be a popular thing in a lot of the stuff we've read recently.
I don't think Kraven's Last Hunt can take responsibility for the whole of narrative captions, but it's certainly something that, much like a lot of movements in modern comics, had its origin in the sort of grim and gritty movements of the 80s. Like, I think Frank Miller was doing this stuff in his 80s Batman and Daredevil stuff, and this is like from the peak grim and gritty superhero comics period. This is around the time that Miller was doing Born Again and some of his earlier gritty Daredevil, and that Miller and Alan Moore were doing grim and gritty Batman. And it led to a lot of influences. Like, a lot of it is just, increased amounts of violence or psychological contemplation in your superhero comics, both of which are also on display here. But yeah, another one is the narrative captions.
Yeah, and there is also quite a lot of violence in this story. Kraven, well, he's hunting Spider-Man with like a rifle and to shoot him. And obviously there's fight sequences, the bits when Kraven kills people, and there's also another villain, Vermin, introduced as well, and who's a half human, half rat creature that kind of kills and eats people. So yeah, there's again a lot of violence here, and it's certainly dark.
It is, although, because this is technically, I guess, a PG-rated Spider-Man comic, a lot of it is kind of off-camera. Like, there's no, like, on-panel images of Vermin, like, biting people's arms off or anything. And again, considering how much he's restricted by those lines, it's impressive how much Mike Zeck and DeMatteis managed to make this, again, quite fucking disturbing. It sits with you, this comic, in a way many Spider-Man comics do not.
Yeah, I mean, most of the really violent stuff happens, like, off-panel, for the exact reason you said, but it means that you see it through other characters' reactions, such as police finding dead bodies later, or things that people in the streets says. There are a few scenes involving people wandering the streets. Obviously, Mary Jane is a character kind of external to the superhero conflict that you kind of gives you every person's view of kind of what's going on, and through things like newspapers that are in the background or discussion you hear. So you kind of see other characters' reactions to the violence rather than seeing the violence itself, which in some ways can be more intense.
Yeah, which is a clever way of working around it. I think the art here as a whole is pretty great. I think it's not very showy art, the 90s are not yet here. We're very much in a very subdued, just tell the story vibe, but it's really beautifully rendered. It's really, really incredibly atmospheric, and again, the feeling of this story, the atmosphere of it is everything, and Mike Zeck absolutely kills the atmosphere here. Kills in a good way, I should stress.
Yeah,
and as you say, the surreal stuff, the brutally realistic stuff, like the police finding bodies in the street, and all the, Spider-Man versus Kraven stuff, which I guess sits somewhere between those two things. It all flows together into this sort of clear, cohesive story, and it's amazing work from Zeck.
Yeah, one thing I really liked about it is that I thought the artwork really captures rain really well. It's like pretty much permanently raining throughout the whole story, and you just get the sense that like everything is just like soaked and sodden and miserable. And I thought, it really just captured, what it's like when it just pours with rain. Yeah,
there's a lot of visceral stuff. Comics sometimes don't always get the feeling of texture and sound and that well. But again, it's weirdly visceral, loving that word today. Like, there's an ongoing motif of a grave diggers digging graves and the sort of hacking into the ground with this sort of recurring chunk noise. And it just keeps hammering at you. It just comes and comes. I think there's a point where he's putting it at the bottom of every page as this guy digs deeper and deeper. It becomes clear why that's important later on, but even at the time, it's just ominous.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I thought also the sewers were captured very well. A lot of the story takes place in the sewers, and again, it really shows like how dark and cramped the subterranean world where Vermin lives is. Again, it's captured very, very well, and you get the sense of just like how unpleasant it is to live in the sewer.
It's just very interior, this story, isn't it? Everyone's very trapped in their heads or the sewers or a coffin.
Yeah, and trapped also by past experiences, because Vermin's been traumatized by a past fight between him and Spider-Man and Captain America, which is referenced. Kraven's had a breakdown. He's trapped by his life. He talks about his parents and, how they grew up in Russia and lost everything in the Russian Revolution. Obviously, Spider-Man's trapped by what happens to him in the story, and the trauma of that. So everyone's kind of living through these like past traumas.
Yeah, Kraven is an odd character because he's been in quite a few Spider-Man comics before this, but almost everything that's been done with him since is basically informed by this, as I have inferred before. Almost every appearance of Kraven before this, he was just, the hunter guy, the funny hunter guy, the funny Tarzan man, the funny guy who hunts for sports. So if you ever want to do a story where you need a hunter, let's use Kraven. He's our go-to hunty guy. And this story basically, and I'm going to do the spoiler now, lads, so last warning, this story both gave Kraven a lot of depth and a lot of background and motivation, and then here it comes at the end. It's called Kraven's Last Hunt, and sure enough, having completed his job of becoming Spider-Man, he blows his own head off.
Which I found to be quite surprising, actually, when I read it. I knew it was called Kraven's Last Hunt, and I assumed there would be some kind of ending for the character, but I didn't know they would actually go there. I mean, again, it's a PG-rated comic, so maybe I underestimated how much they were willing to show. I mean, again, you don't see, like, brain splattered.
The bullet entering his head, no.
No, but you get, everything they can get away with in a PG comic.
Very, very clear what happens. Yeah, you don't see his head exploding, but there is blood. It is very clear.
Yeah, it's no ambiguity.
I read this, honestly, I always envy you, your pure experience of this comic, because when I read it in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was aware of its canonical place in Spider-Man history. I knew what the ending was, because it's been referenced a million times in subsequent stories. Oh, yeah, Kraven buries Spider-Man, then shoots himself. So I knew what was coming, and yeah, I envy you a bit.
Yeah, no, it was a good way to come to the comic, with no preconceptions. I mean, usually the best way to experience something. Yeah, and that definitely is the best way to experience this if you've not read it.
Yeah, and if you've listened to this podcast, then we've just ruined it for you.
We just ruined it, yeah.
Who knows if that amazing effects will stay in. We'll see how it sounds when I listen back.
It sounded alright.
Let's see how it sounds on the playback. Anyway.
We're doing sound effects now?
Yeah, we're doing hilarious fart noises while we talk about suicide. That's what we're doing on this show now.
Okay.
Anyway. No, even without the foreknowledge, which I unfortunately had, I think it's clear. It's obviously clear from the beginning because the narration makes it painfully clear. But Kraven's had a quite disturbing breakdown, but the way he works through this depressing logic is, and it's weird as well because it almost gives the story a sort of climax, but also anti-climax. Because again, just describing the ending now, you fully expect Spider-Man to be coming back for a final showdown with Kraven, but Kraven has killed himself before Spider-Man can get there.
Yeah, subverting the narrative expectations.
Yeah, and it is an ending, and it is a really strange, sad, sits with you ending. It's just not at all what you expect.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got there's a lot of things to dig into. Things like that. I liked running quotations from William Blake's poem, The Tiger, though with the word tiger replaced by spider.
Yeah.
Which I believe also we read a Punisher comic that did the same thing. Was it actually called The Tiger?
Yeah, that was called The Tiger, and it did not replace it with Spider, obviously. Yeah. Fun fact, I believe the story was originally published under the title Fearful Symmetry, because I guess Kraven's Last Hunt would have been a spoiler. It's only really become Kraven's Last Hunt on retrospect.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I did notice how it said, Fearful Symmetry on the start of each issue. Yeah, like I say, there's a lot to dig into here. I mean, I read some commentary from J.M. Mateus describing his own work. So yeah, this isn't my insight, this is his. Which I did really like is that when Kraven becomes Spider-Man, what you're getting is Kraven's perception of Spider-Man. So this is how, he's more violent, he's more disturbed, and that kind of highlights for you, how Kraven sees the world and how he sees Spider-Man. Then makes you see what's different about Peter Parker being Spider-Man as opposed to someone else. And I thought that's a very interesting point.
Yeah, but it's the sort of story that's been done before with, there was a story in the 90s, Nightfall, where Batman was replaced by another guy trying to be Batman and, again, being very violent and disturbed. And, yeah, it made a lot of the same points, although it's probably not as good as Kraven's Last Hunt.
Yeah, and it's one of the few Batman comics I've actually read.
Yeah, James Mateus, I've read a lot of his stuff. This was, as I say, not the first thing of his I've read, but it's the most sort of standalone and the one I could easily give you to read in 2 weeks. So we're doing this. But one thing Mateus is routinely very good at is this sort of emotional, psychological stuff. This sort of really digging into the characters in a insightful, upsetting at times way. Yeah, he's got a very good eye for this sort of very on-the-nose emotional captions. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes there's a bit too much psychobabble, but when it works, it's like in this, it's really affecting.
Yeah, well, I think anything can be done well and anything can be done badly, and it's done well here. It gives you more insight into the character. But yeah, it doesn't straight up say what the character's thinking. It gives you a sort of circuitous route to the character's thoughts through the, churn of the natural thought process. People don't think in ways that are linear, straightforward, or accessible to other people. So you kind of get the sense of what it is actually like to be in someone's head and the accompanying chaos of that and also illumination of that.
Well, yeah, it's the sort of impactful visceralness of it is how clearly terrified Spider-Man is the whole time. Like, they sort of, in the moment, shock of it. Like, it's not him just describing what's happening to him, it's just him sounding fucking terrified. Understandably.
Yeah, that was very strong, yeah. And it's nice, tight 6 issues. Yeah, the plot keeps moving and stuff. It'll always loop back round to, one element keeping them back in either Mary Jane or Vermin or something like that. It's very tightly plotted in that way and keeps the tension going.
Yeah, no, it's a great story. It is quite routinely in the top 3 or so in best ever Spider-Man story lists. I think deservedly, to be honest. It hasn't impacted the character as much as some of these, like, incredibly well-regarded, gritty ones have. Like, many Batman fans will say with a sad look on their face that the success of, like, the extreme success of a lot of gritty takes on Batman from around this era have just ruined the character and meant we never get anything else.
Good point.
Whereas, despite the success and acclaim of Kraven's Last Hunt, people seem to have correctly realised that you can't really turn Spider-Man into this sort of thing all the time. It's nice, and occasionally it works, even in the present day, to remind us that Spider-Man can do this sort of thing, but the world does not need a million monthly Spider-Man comics like this.
It's exceptional, which is what makes it good, that it's unusual. And yes, you would argue that Batman has been ruined by dark and gritty Batman, and in fact it's ruined quite a lot of superheroes. Most of the DC's attempt to make films of any of their characters. I don't think the world needs dark and gritty Superman, but we seem to get lots of it. Partly because people love dark and gritty Batman so much.
But yeah, no, this is a nice example of using your grittiness correctly and not allowing it to become embedded in the character, which, as a Spider-Man fan, I appreciate.
Finally, this episode, we will be discussing Earthshock, the Peter Davison era Doctor Who adventure. The Doctor, alongside companions Tegan, Nyssa and Adric, arrives on Earth in the 25th century to find the planet on high alert and something mysterious picking off a group of Marines in an underground cave system. As the Doctor gets involved, he uncovers the layers of a plan set by his old enemy, the Cybermen. I recommended this 4-part Doctor Who adventure to Nick. Similar to Kraven's Last Hunt, the ending is a crucial part of this, which we will discuss, but I think we'll try and do a spoiler-free section first before we get into the big spoilers. So, Nick, what did you think of this?
I enjoyed some chunks of this, especially in the back half. I thought the last 2 parts ran at a nice pace. Everyone acted enjoyably. There's some good twists at the end. For some reason, I always forget when I'm watching old Who, the 4 times in my life that I've done it, that, they too can sometimes have clever time travel twists. And there's a good one here. There's some nice bits. And, yeah, some other ending moments as well, which I'm not spoiling. I found the first 2 episodes had a slightly weird languid pacing that I've sometimes found in old Doctor Who episodes, which is, it feels like they almost decide on the number of episodes, and then some poor bastard has to stretch the story out for that long, even if the first 2 episodes could easily have been 1 episode without losing that much of any import. But yeah, I like seeing the Cybermen in their old sort of tinfoil form. It was nice to see Peter Davison in action. I've never seen him in The Doctor apart from that one little sketch bit he did with David Tennant.
Yeah, it's noticeable how different things like the pacing is for New Who compared to old Who. It really shows how much more fast-paced modern TV is compared to even the 80s. They did strictly do these seasons of 4 adventures, 4 episodes for each one. So yeah, with this very strict format. So yeah, I think that might be literally what happened there.
Yeah, I really do feel like the first 2 parts could have been 1. I'm not entirely sure I fully understand why we had to spend quite so long in that cave to reach the point we reached at the end.
I do quite like the bit when they're the Marines are being picked off by something in the dark. There is, that does build tension nicely.
Yeah, as you say, I had been somewhat spoilt for the fact the Cybermen were in it by the fact that I had to obtain the DVD to watch this, and there's a massive picture of a Cyberman on the front. So I did not get quite the virginal Alastair reading Kraven's Last Hunt experience.
Yeah, which is a shame because that's not how you'd have experienced it watching it on TV originally. So obviously you get the title at the beginning, which says Earthshock, and usually the title will reveal what the villain is. So yeah, if it says Planet of the Daleks, we're getting a Dalek adventure this week, or Time in the Rani, we're getting a Rani adventure, and so on and so forth. But yeah, this one obviously lures you in with, it's just called Earthshock. You think oh, it's a one-off villain, like Inferno or one of the many ones that doesn't feature a classic villain. And then obviously it's a twist when it's revealed that the Cybermen are actually the villains behind it, completely ruined by the DVD box.
Yep. But yeah, I thought it did kick off nicely once they finally got to the spaceship. I enjoyed the spaceship captain and her horrible personality. That was a very fun addition to the whole thing, and it was entertaining to see the Cybermen just clomp out and take over the whole ship. It is always a bit strange going back and watching old sci-fi and being reminded of the low special effects budget, but I've seen worse.
Yeah, the budget was quite low. Although that moment of the Cybermen punching out of the metal cylinders and walking out, that's become a classic Doctor Who moment. It's one thing in any documentary on old Who, it's one of the clips they always throw in, especially when it comes to the Cybermen.
Are they canonically wrapped in cling film?
Not really sure why they're wrapped in cling film to be transported, but it is, I don't know, the moment of them punching through what's supposed to be the metal containers. It's become a classic. Some might describe it as a camp classic, but classic nonetheless.
Maybe this is exposing a weird prejudice on my part, but this era does seem to struggle for quite a lot of similar looking people with similar brown hair, which they then compound by having many of them in the same uniform. At least one of them had a moustache, I suppose.
The Marine Corporal, yeah. I don't know if that was the lingering 70s design style hanging over. But yeah, you're right. The captain of the freighter, played by Beryl Reid, is great. Yeah, she was a well-known actress at the time. She was in Smiley's People and did a lot of theatre work. She had her own show, the Beryl Reid Show.
Oh, okay.
She was been a recognisable person to audiences at the time, similar to how, today they get Peter Kay or James Corden to crop up in a Doctor Who episode playing a one-off character. So yeah, they had TV and stage stars, of the day in Doctor Who in the 80s.
Yeah, she did definitely get all the best lines in a very sort of big guest star way.
Yeah, you would have recognised her at the time. And obviously, yeah, we've got some classic companion action going on here. The trio of Tegan, Nyssa and Adric, very famous companion trio. New Who, not so much doing the multiple companions. I guess we had Amy and Rory for a bit. And also, yeah, the most recent Doctor has had 3 companions for a bit.
Graham, Yaz and the other one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll just gloss over the fact neither of us can remember his name.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, this particular story did, Adric was clearly the main companion in being used in this story, and the other 2 did just sort of hang around a bit.
Yeah. I do like the fact that the character Nyssa is that she's someone who understands a bit of the TARDIS and can use it a bit, can't fly it, but can use it a bit. That's because she's, not human and from the future and has lots of knowledge. Same with Adric as well. Again, something they've not done in New Who. The TARDIS is impenetrable to all people apart from the Doctor. Yeah, this is I guess a classic configuration, and Tegan is being brought back for the Power of the Doctor 100th anniversary of the BBC special, so it's a good character to familiarise yourself with. She is one of the classic companions and was around for a long time with both Tom Baker and Peter Davison.
Was she the one who went out and ran around a bit, or was she the one who stayed in the TARDIS and just pointed and shouted?
She's the one who went out and ran around a bit.
Okay,
She's
thanks.
The Australian air stewardess, though you don't really know she's an air stewardess in this one.
Yeah, no, as I say, she didn't really... I mean, it was nice to see her doing something other than standing around, but yeah, she didn't get a huge amount of character work here, because obviously Adric is the main companion being used, which, in the era we just mentioned with the 13th Doctor, Yaz, Graham and the other one, there was a certain amount of, we've only really got enough plot for 1 or 2 of the companions to have something to do. There would always be at least 1, if not 2, just sort of hanging around, and that remains the case here.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, Nyssa's role in this is very much to sort of just add bits of exposition, and read things off the TARDIS. Yeah, again, there's not really enough plot to involve them all. As we're discussing companions, I guess we will drop the spoiler wall, I guess, at this point, if you don't want the ending of Earthshock ruined.
Yep.
Skip to, the end of the show, I suppose. So yeah, last chance. Flee now to remain spoiler-free. Yeah. So what is obviously one of the most famous things about this Doctor Who adventure is it is, and I guess hardcore Whovians can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is the first and only time that a companion dies in service.
I mean, based on my New Who only knowledge, Clara and Bill did sort of die in service, but were then brought back in weird fairy tale ways about an episode later.
Yeah, well, that's Doctor Who for you. So yeah, but this is dead forever, never to return. No fairy tale get-outs.
Yeah. I mean, Adric definitely got the most characterisation. He was given some stuff to do. I didn't actually know he was going to die, but in the second episode, when he has the chance to go home but chooses to stay, I was a bit sort of interesting. This is the sort of thing that often happens to people shortly before they get murdered.
But yeah, so you didn't know that as a spoiler, I guess, because it is, I guess, a piece of information that's out there in the culture.
I did not know that as a spoiler, but that did seem a bit of a is he for it moment for me, yes.
But I believe he's the only companion who's ever permanently died in the show. That's why, yeah, rather than having the famous Doctor Who theme at the end of the last episode, it just plays out to silence and a little picture of Adric's broken badge.
Just out of interest, and in the nicest possible way, with minimal disrespect intended to Adric, is he popular? Is he known for being likeable and beloved, or is he seen as quite annoying?
He was a popular companion, partly I think because, it's a very famous trio of companions. He was part of that. I guess the tragic circumstances of his death has added to the character's infamy. He was also in a whole wave of absolute classic Doctor Who adventures. Keeper of Traken, which introduced Nyssa. Logopolis, that was Tom Baker's last performance. Castrovalva, Peter Davison's first performance as the Doctor. A whole range of classic Doctor Who featuring those 3 companions. So he's, I think, well loved as a companion, being part of an absolute classic period of Doctor Who history.
Fair enough. I only really know him from his character moments at the first couple of episodes of this, but he was mostly quite pissy and arrogant.
Yeah, I suppose maybe not the best intro to the character. Obviously, this was towards the end of a whole season, which, you'd have, I suppose most people would have watched preceding adventures in that season. I think season 19 of Doctor Who it was. Maybe it's not, you're not necessarily designed to drop in at this point. But yeah, his thing is that he's a mathematical genius, so again, he's sort of closer to the Doctor's level.
And yeah, I got that at the end, and that was a nice moment when he had tried to stay behind to solve the weird puzzle. It was, I guess, again, in a weird sort of, in a similar way to Kraven's Last Hunt, I guess. It was a weird sort of moment of anti-drama, because there was this sort of, okay, I'm going to completely spoil the ending of Earthshock now. They've realised that the ship is the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, and therefore at that point, due to the way inevitable time travel fixed points always seem to work, we know it has to hit. But there's then still subsequently 10 minutes of will Adric stop it from hitting? It's like, okay, this is actually a nice moment of sort of inevitable doom, because surely we know he's going to fail. Yeah,
well, also I do like the bit when he's pulled away by the captain of the Marines and they get in the escape pod and they're going to leave the ship, and then at the last minute he goes, oh yeah, I know the answer, then jumps back into the ship and the door shuts. And then obviously that's the moment when you realise, like, oh, that's probably a bad decision.
little bit.
Yeah, it's a classic moment. Fond of the word classic in this episode. Yeah, I guess because it is. Also a great Cybermen adventure. I feel the Cybermen have not been served brilliantly by New Who. There's been some quite good ones in the second series, the first David Tennant one. Although, again, some of their best episodes, they kind of co-starred along with the Daleks.
Well, yeah, the episode where they fought the Daleks at the end of the David Tennant's second season, the first full season of David Tennant, whatever, was pretty enjoyable, but also not a great time for the Cybermen themselves, because they basically got completely rolled over by the Daleks.
Yeah.
Just whomped and annihilated like an inconvenience.
Yeah, and there's not been, so many standout ones. There is that one when their Cybermen are taking over the mall with James Corden. That one was alright.
The one towards the end of the Peter Capaldi era, where the one which again features the sort of death of Bill, I thought was a pretty good story. That was quite grim in places.
Yeah, when they brought back the Mondas Cybermen, again, Mondas referred to here.
Yeah, no, I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, but this is some good trad Cybermen. They come across, they're quite grim, they have no emotions, they don't care. Yeah, they're quite effective at chewing through Marines in a quite unpleasant way. They also, in this, brought in a bit of Doctor Who lore that they've not brought back for New Who, which is, Cybermen are killed by gold. That's their weakness. They've not decided to bring that back. Is it because it's a little silly?
Well, yeah, it's like the old classic of Green Lantern's main weakness being yellow, isn't it? In fact, yellow, gold, are they related in some way? Was someone in the Doctor Who creative team doing a shout out to Green Lantern?
Who knows?
But yeah, who knows? Anyway, I've only seen the episode we just mentioned where the Mondas Cybermen come back once, so I can't remember if they made any remarks about gold weaknesses.
As far as I'm aware, gold being the Cybermen's weakness is not featured in New Who. Yeah, this was a revival for the Cybermen, Earthshock. They last had been a Doctor Who villain in Revenge of the Cybermen in 1975, so that's 7 years before. So yeah, they were sort of brought back after a period of absence. Yeah, in that adventure when they were trying to destroy a planet made out of gold, for obvious reasons. But yeah, I like the fact that they brought in, the Cybermen's weakness for gold, and also, again, very unusually, this is an adventure where the Doctor uses a gun. Almost never, but he does use a gun at the end to kill the Cyber Commander. Rarely used, but yeah, occasionally the Doctor uses a gun.
Yeah, the old episodes sometimes seem a bit more keen on just rampant death than the newer ones. I don't know. No, I'm not going to distinguish between eras. There just seems to be a lot less casual death in some of the newer episodes. Whereas this one, the bodies are really piling up.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because now we feel that, like, Doctor Who, which is ostensibly aimed at children, or at least a broad range of audiences, that, they think is it bad to show children lots of death over their Saturday night entertainment? Is there a desire to, like, kind of turn down the violence a bit? I don't know, I don't want to play into some narrative that we're a more pampered and, age or whatever now, but there definitely was more violence. They used to have more characters in Old Who. I guess that they would have 4 episodes, so there was, in slower pace, there was more time to kind of build up the supporting cast a bit more. Usually the Doctor would land somewhere and meet kind of 3 or 4 people in addition to their companions, and usually, the Doctor would make about 5 friends and 4 of them would be dead by the end, especially if there were some Daleks involved, including one notorious moment where someone got their face melted off by a Dalek virus, which was quite traumatizing when I was a kid. Yeah, so I don't know, they don't do that so much now. Is it because they do sharper, tighter, shorter stories?
Because there's too much shouting, yeah.
Shouting, yeah. Or is it because, again, we don't want to have as violent children's entertainment? I don't have an answer to that, but it is definitely a trend.
Yeah, the 80s weren't quite as gritty a time for Doctor Who as they were for Spider-Man.
No, probably not. But yeah, you're right, there's definitely more shooting, more casual violence in this than more recent Who.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it has its militaristic moments, but anyway. It's interesting to see Peter Davison in action. I didn't really have a strong opinion of what he was like as a Doctor, I suppose. He had a slightly patronising vibe going on here. I don't know if that's his general thing.
Yeah, I mean, the Doctor did in the past, and is that kind of, I don't know, slightly strict school teacher thing going on. Different Doctors had it to more or lesser extents. Tom Baker was a bit more zany. Yeah, obviously, following up Tom Baker, difficult. So, yeah, he's got a different personality. Obviously, nowhere near as patronising or full of the put-downs as his successor, Colin Baker, who was less popular. Peter Davison shows a real range, and I think he really can act. Like, yeah, he starts off quite annoyed with Adric, and then there's a sort of a period of mellowing, and then, yeah, you can see that there's a real warmth and friendship between the characters, and obviously, yeah, everyone just looks very sad when he dies at the end.
Yeah, it did almost make me want to watch the next one and see what happens next. Did the Doctor go through a vengeful dark period after this, or did he just get over it in about half an hour?
I'm not sure. I think there is basically... I think I have seen the next adventure. I can't remember what it is. I think there is a bit of them being sad and like... Yeah, it is not just a sort of shrugged off, oh yeah, like it never happened. There is a sort of period of mourning and then they move on. Yeah, and they did, continue the kind of emotional arcs across adventures. There's a later Peter Davison one where Resurrection of the Daleks, later Peter Davison one, that does end in a huge Dalek battle with the sort of Dalek and human battle with an enormous amount of dead people. And yeah, and at the end, Tegan says like, yeah, I can't travel with you anymore, Doctor. It's just too grim and nasty. So yeah, there are some quite dark, upsetting ones in the 80s. Tegan did return actually after a brief intermission, but yeah, it is quite sad. Yeah, when she leaves literally after just stepping over piles of dead bodies in this warehouse after a particularly nasty Dalek battle.
Excellent. I wonder if she'll mention it in the Centenary special.
Maybe, yeah. It's a good primer, I thought. Now's a great time to revisit some classic Who's. We're going to have the last Jodie Whittaker adventure and obviously some old favourites, including David Tennant and Catherine Tate and Tegan are all coming back, as well as all celebrating the centenary of the BBC. So it's a good moment to visit some of Doctor Who's history.
Yep, look for our no doubt rapturous review of that at some point in the next 2 to 3 episodes, I guess. It's meant to air at some point in October.
That's all we have time for this episode. Thanks for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, please subscribe and review in your podcatcher of choice. It really helps the show out. If you want more from us, then you can visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can hear back issues of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and read short written pieces by Nick and myself.
And if you want to hear still more, even shorter pieces from us, then you can follow us on social media, where we are Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook or MFV Podcast on Twitter. Or if you want to break things down to individual people, you can follow me on Twitter as NickMB, or I'm on the internet at nickbryan.com.
You can follow me on Twitter, where I'm at Alastair J.R. Ball, and get more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Join us for the next issue of the podcast, when we will be engaging in a family dance-off with After Yang. Watch the film or listen to the episode to get that reference. And we will also be reacquainting ourselves with the work of Stephen Moffat with Inside Man. Join us in 2 weeks for that. Until then, goodbye.
Bye.
This time we are going back to the 80s, where I have been rising from the dead with the classic Spider-Man comic Kraven's Last Hunt, and Nick has been battling the Cyberman. Cyberman? More than one of them.
They could afford more than one Cyberman, it's true.
They could, yes. Which I'm sure we'll come to.